Well, welcome. I'm Victoria. It's so nice to meet you if you are new here. Thanks for coming back if you are a regular. There are so many readathons that I am participating in, plus there are other things that I'm trying to wrap around. This is where I get to finally talk about some of the books that I've read for these readathons. But one thing that I need to say is that my spring reading is completed. My TBR list that I had announced to you, it's done. I finished early. So let's get started. I'm so glad I finally get to talk about the arc that I have been reading. I read this for like 3 weeks, which is a long time for me because I just wasn't into it. I wasn't feeling it. I would read it at night and then I would just be like, okay, I'm tired. I'm going to sleep. I'm not really into it. I'd say the last maybe 50 pages I got into it, which is really not good, but it wasn't even a bad story. It wasn't something for me at the time. So what is the story about? This is a Christian historical fiction book about World War II. In France, we have resistance fighters. There's Zélie and Marcel, and they are in Marseille. Of course, this is the Spy Keeper of Marseille. But Zélie, she is a widow. She has 2 children. She has a mother that she cares for as well, but she is very much involved in the resistance. She talks about her own marriage that she had that was actually not that great, and now her husband died while fighting in the war. Now, he had a friend who had been in a POW camp even, who is a well-known pianist, and Marcel is that friend. So the two of them are working in the resistance, but he is doing his best to just be undercover, to just do his thing with music, to not get in trouble, but he is so drawn to Zélie. They are on this secret mission and doing their best to also live their lives in faith for God. I actually liked the spy work that was brought up throughout this. I liked the bits of history. I would have liked a little bit more in depth about that. I thought the romance story was very nice. While it was good, some of it just didn't seem a little bit realistic to me. Plus there's like a 2-year gap at the end, and it's like, well, 2 years, that's like a bad part of the war. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happened in those 2 years? And it's all like happy-go-lucky at the end, and I'm like, okay. But I think that a lot of people will enjoy this book. It just was a little bit slow paced for me. For content, people do die. There's spy work involved in this. There were people threatened. There's talk about torture. There is talk about nudity at one point, but there is nothing sexual about it. Someone undresses for something spy work. No one sees the nudity at all. There is smoking. There is talk about a pregnancy out of wedlock. There are domestic disputes mentioned. There are some sweet kisses in case you're like, oh, I don't like to read about kissing. There is deceit in this. Of course, spy work, you're going to be lying. And there is drinking as well. I don't remember there being any drunkenness. There might have been. Finding Margaret Fuller. It's been a long time coming that I was going to read this book. I almost every month, I'm like, I'm going to read this book. I'm going to read this book because it's on my yearly list. And I just kept pushing it aside. And I was like, okay, we're near the halfway mark. I need to read it. I've been wanting to. You have no idea how many times I even got this from the library and put it back. This takes place in Concord, Massachusetts. I have been there. I love it. And the reason why is I'm a big Henry David Thoreau fan. But as a big fan and someone that has been to Walden Pond and the fairy pond that they mention, this, I just like, I could envision everything because I had been there. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he was very well known for his writing, his poetry, his work. So was Henry David Thoreau. They were pretty much best friends. But then you also have Louisa May Alcott. She is in this book. Her father is one of the main characters. Well, I guess a minor character. And she is a minor character as well. And the reason why they're all mentioned is because they were very close to Margaret Fuller, who is a writer that a lot of people don't remember or ever hear about. She was actually a big inspiration to Louisa May Alcott. She was well known for her early feminism because she was a single woman for a long time, making her own business to support her mother and her family. And she was even the inspiration for the Scarlet Letter. Nathaniel Hawthorne is in this book as well. So because you have all these greats in an area that were all like, they all knew each other, you're going to learn a lot about Margaret Fuller's interactions with them. So I've been very intrigued to learn about her because I actually knew nothing. And now next time I go to Concord, I want to find out if there's stuff about her. I'm going to look it up. That is my goal. Margaret Fuller, I must say, she had a lot of interesting beliefs. I don't completely agree with her beliefs. There was some questionable stuff throughout it. And one of them is that there are lots of understandings that there was a possible romance between Margaret Fuller and Emerson. It was more like a romance of their minds rather than anything physical. There was nothing physical. It was all like an emotional affair, in my opinion. So they talk about her feelings, his feelings, their interactions, and that's a lot of this. But my favorite part of this book is actually when Margaret Fuller, she was able to get a writing job and she went to Italy for a while before it was officially Italy, which I had not known about their history of independence. And so this is about her time during their fight for independence, and she was there. It was really, really interesting. I learned a lot in that part. For the most part, I really enjoyed this book. It was mainly the stuff between Emerson and Fuller that just was like, can we have a lot less of this in this book? It just was kind of weird at times. I will say there was something near the end of the book that was a PG-13 sexual scene that I had no idea was going to be in it. I couldn't find anything about sexual content when I first originally wanted to read this book. So I was extremely surprised where there is a premarital sexual scene. It's not graphic, but to me, it was just going a little far. There was deceit. Obviously, women are looked down upon, very much so. There is a thing between Edgar Allan Poe, who I am a very, very big fan of, and Margaret Fuller. There was a real thing that they did not get along well. He kind of doesn't like her. He questions her. And then other people also don't like the fact that she is making her own way. There are some war things that are described, as well as a child who is malnourished at one point. People die, including a child. There is a pregnancy that is mentioned out of wedlock. But yeah, for the most part, I really enjoyed this book. It's just iffy content, very iffy. This became a spring reading list book and originally was not, but because I wanted to read it like pretty much all spring, but I need to explain what happened. Originally, this was on my spring TBR. I DNF'd it. I don't need to talk about why. I got 75 pages through here. There were things about it that I was like, I don't agree with this, and I don't like where this is going. This is just odd. I couldn't get into it. It took me like 3 or 4 days to finally give up. And if I'm reading a book for 4 days and I'm only on page 75, that's a problem. DNF. So then, which I don't have anymore because I gave it away, Theo of Golden, which everyone talks so highly about, also another book that I couldn't get into. I got 150 pages in. I spent like 4 or 5 days reading that, and I couldn't get into it, guys. There were just some things about it that I was just like, yeah, I'm not enjoying it. So I DNF'd it. So I had to replace it because the whole rule is to replace my spring TBR book. So I DNF'd 2 books. So I was scared when I started reading this one. I was supposed to actually read this for 2 book clubs that I'm a part of back in April. And I had a hold on this book at the library that lasted, it seemed, forever, until finally one of the women in the book club that I meet in person with let me borrow the book. After we already discussed the book, we got together at some other thing and she brought it and I was like, oh, thank you so much. So I really did want to read this. Yes, this is a very popular one, as it should be. I loved this book and I was surprised because I didn't think that I would. This has an 84 Charing Cross Road feel to it. I definitely, and they even mentioned the book in here, so I felt like it could have been a big inspiration because the main character, Sybil, in this book, she takes on that kind of role. She is writing emails and letters between herself and her family members, her friends, neighbors, people she encounters, people that she gets information from and talks, and she starts to form bonds with, these like strangers that she keeps talking to. So Sybil, she worked for this judge for a long time, and this book begins where the judge dies. She was known to have worked alongside him for many years. A lot of people thought that she was like a work wife of sorts, but she had never been that close to him. They just worked really well together. She has 2 living children, but she does have one that had passed away, and we learned that pretty early on. So she, throughout this, she has a lot of grief that she goes through. Even though it had been so long, she constantly is thinking about the child that she lost. And over time, we learn more about that child. We learn about what her own experience was, what her children go through, how her children view her. And she was adopted. And she does this DNA test. We start to learn more about the connection she makes through that DNA test. And I think the part of why I really love this is because I got a DNA test 6 years ago. I found my dad's missing family. He never knew who his father was. He was not adopted. His mother just never told him who his father was. I felt like I could totally understand a lot of her feelings. I felt like I was kind of reading my dad's story. It was really strange at times where I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I thought the perspective was perfect for that. So I love this. I feel like when I started this, I was like, I don't understand really what's going on. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to gather that information because you're just learning from letters, like all these people writing her and she writes back. And then after a while, you're like, oh, and this takes a few years that we go through, but it was very good. And I had such a good time reading it. I said to my husband, like, I read this in 2 days and I was like, I can't stop reading this. And that's when I know it's a really good book. For content, what you need to know, and some things that I didn't know when I went into it, there is mention of a gay couple. There are threats made. There is talk about death. There are cancers, ailments, a lot of grief. There is a character in this that had attempted suicide. There is child death. There are a few D words and S words in here, but there's like really only that handful. There is talk about divorce. There is someone that sees two people at the same time, but they had not made anything official. So it's like they're just trying to decide who they want to be with. That's all the content in this. Now I want to talk about the books that I read so far for the June Picnic Readathon. I'm going to start with the buddy read, also one of my spring reads, that I did with Tay for the June Picnic Readathon. This covers Kay's Regency romance selection. So this is set in the Regency time period, and we have two characters. There's Bridget and Rafe. She lives in a part of England. She has a father who is a preacher, and she has a little bit of issues with how he raised her. She has a brother that is in the Navy. They have not heard from him in a while. They don't know what's going on with him. And she has a best friend named Abigail who lives next door, basically. So on her friend Abigail's father's property, Bridget is so excited because they uncover a Roman artifact. They're very excited about it. She especially loves history. She loves digging and the idea of excavating things. This is fascinating for her. But then Rafe comes around and he is like a lord who had just inherited an estate. And a lot of people live on his land. He has to figure out how to run this estate and how to deal with the people. He's a very nice man. He has problems with his uncle who he inherited the land from. And when he meets Bridget, he starts to form a friendship with her. They form a bond. They have a really good relationship. I liked their interactions a lot. Something both Tay and I realized about this book. First of all, I read this right after The Secrets Beneath that I reviewed last time. That was also finding things, so like bones, and now this is finding ruins. So I was like, whoa, I'm like on a theme here. So it reminded me a little bit actually of that book, which Tay had read that book too. And we both have read Pride and Prejudice, which this has a lot of Pride and Prejudice vibes to us. And also it had vibes from Seeking Persephone, which we both read. It was just like we kept finding these references. So it was just very interesting how unoriginal it was. But it was a good story. We had fun. There were things that I felt were not completely finished or questions that I had at the end, but it was a good story. There was a faith element, not as strong as some other books, but it was in it. There was some adventure in this. For content, there is theft. There are talks of a woman who has been in a relationship with a man before marriage and gets pregnant. There is deceit, there is fighting, there's murder, there's death, and there are injuries. And there's even talk about a little child that had died. Hopefully I didn't miss any content in that one. Another spring plus another one that is for the June picnic. So Lucy had Panda, which is to read a book that has a black and white cover. Lots of black and white. This, I gathered a lot from this book. This was written by a pastor. You know, this was actually perfect for me because I've been talking a lot about grief and things. Everyone encounters suffering in some way. But his point in this is that Jesus is always there. And I really enjoyed how he brought up scriptures to prove that it's not that we're going to go to be with Jesus when we die. It's not that we should pray for Jesus to come quick on earth. It's to know that Jesus is already here and his Holy Spirit is within us. We should live as if he is right here with us now. And it was just so clarifying for me, and it made me feel such peace and comfort, and I loved it to know that he understands, he's there. It made me think a lot about scriptures in a new way that I've read several times. You know, sometimes when people see it in a different light from you, you're like, oh, so that's why it's a strange and gracious light. Like, it's a light that you don't really think about. In each chapter, he goes through things like Advent, the Ascension. He goes through Pentecost and just various things throughout to explain how Jesus is here. And the stories, he sometimes talks about some of his congregants. So he does bring up things like how one woman had a husband who had a pornography addiction. I really liked that story. It was very fascinating to see how that woman dealt with it because it was brought up again later. There are things like parents that have teenager who doesn't listen and just is out doing so many troublesome things and how to handle that. He has a lot of people he goes to their deathbeds and he talks to them, or people that come up to him saying they're ill and sick. It was really good. I very much enjoyed this. And on the June picnic, the next one that I read, which is for Lindsay, she has Pasta, which is supposed to be a book that has something that's really heavy duty. This entire book, 1666, very, very, very sad. There's pretty much hardly any happiness in this book, but I loved it. I had to reduce my rating due to content, but it was very good. It was something that taught me a lot, actually. So 1666 is the year that the Patawamek people, who came from Powhatan and Pocahontas, these people, there was a law that was put in to completely wipe out all of the men, all the warriors, and as much of the women that maybe you can, or make them slaves and their children. So this is a story that takes place really highlighting two women for the majority of this story, where they go on a journey to Barbados. What's it like to be enslaved? But prior to everything that went on, we learn about how they lived their life. So you could see how they were able to farm and how they kept clean. Their cleanliness was very important to them. And it's so sad that we called them savages when they were cleaner than the white people who hardly bathed. So that's actually brought up a lot in this book. And then what the journey was like to go on a boat to Barbados and to deal with all the problems on the boat. This book was so well researched, and that's because the author herself comes from that tribe. So the whole idea is that there are three women that were known survivors. The last woman comes up at the end of this book. And from these three women, they produced people in the States that continue this tribe. And this woman who is the author is one of those people. So she learned a lot about what life was like for the people of the past, her people, so she could educate us, those who are not Patawamek people. I actually got hooked on this story. I loved learning about their survival. And this is definitely a human trafficking book. When there is human trafficking books, there are often mentions of what abuses they went through so you can understand their pain. So while there is rape in this, the rapes are not necessarily described as more like the man when he was done. It would be like that. There were violations of their genitals mentioned. So you need to know that content is in here. It is very sad, but it gives you the horror picture that you need to know about what these women endured. There is murder brought up in this. There are some torture things brought up about what some people went through. And the murder, there are some descriptions of what the murder was like, what they watched happen. There were injuries and illnesses. There were a lot of talks about first blood and menstrual cycles throughout this book, like a lot. There were separations between mother and children in this book. There is drunkenness. There is smoking. It wasn't incredible, but I really liked it. It was very good to understand the culture and what they went through and what their lives were like. Now it's time to go into the Red, White, and June readathon that's going on as well. I have already read 3 of the books, which you really only need to read 2, but whatever. So one of the prompts was a loyalist or patriot. And the idea is that you have to find a book that talks about either of these things. And you know what? I chose to go by the middle ground, the Anabaptist Mennonite viewpoint, because there were some Mennonites that were there during the late 1700s that had to go through different things because they did not want to be in the war at all. So what was that like? So this talks about Quakers and Mennonites. And the man that writes it, he talks a lot about dreams that he had while trying to write this. And he had a lot of what ifs where he was saying like, well, what if this happened instead? If people did this instead, what would this look like if this happened? And one of his examples that I'm going to give for you is that Benjamin Franklin had an illegitimate son that he supported for a long time, but then his son became a loyalist and he was an official in my state, New Jersey. The two of them had a rift because of it, because, Benjamin Franklin was a patriot. And so he was saying about how the Mennonites view war, how they're like, we see both sides and we want to love our neighbors and our enemies and both sides and give them that peace to know that you don't have to fight as much as you think you do. And so a lot of Mennonites were like, well, the law is to pay our taxes and to obey the ruler because it says that in the Bible. It says you have no ruler except for God. Yet the people said, well, give us a ruler. So God gave them a ruler, that you're going to go through things. 1 Samuel 8, he mentions in this book, which is something a lot of Mennonites will reference. So the Mennonites are like, no, you're our ruler, but we will live the best we can can with whoever is ruling over us. So that is how we live our lives. To see this from the perspective of the 1770s, he talks about trying to find out more about his roots because he has loyalist roots. Due to just being a Mennonite, you were considered a loyalist just because of that, even if you didn't stand for any of it. So he talks about trying to find about both sides of his family that came from Pennsylvania and how eventually they went to Canada to try to find that peace because they were endangered, because so many people were being threatened and killed for being Mennonites just because they disagreed. He also gives you background history about the Mennonites. They came over here because of the same thing. They were being killed by both the Reformers and the Catholics because they had a different understanding of child baptism versus adult baptism, and that alone got them destroyed by so many people. So they came over here and now they're dealing with this. But I loved this because there was kind of like a surprise to one of his roots that I was like, that is so cool. It was really fascinating. It wasn't the best book. It was kind of too informational, a little bit repetitive at times, a little bit weird. His dreams were a little bit strange, but it wasn't bad and I enjoyed learning. For content, there is mention of rape. He does talk a lot about how the Native Americans were treated in the US during that time. So that goes into like the 1666. We get that in the 1700s too, including where he mentions that George Washington had a statement to destroy the Six Nations people with the settlements, and that the citizens carry an oath certificate with them while they were traveling, and that Mennonites also had to hold these things. So there's lots of oppression and there's genocide. And there's even mention of a lynching. It was very sad how it was described because it was in detail. So that is the content. This is the book. I know this is a completely different side than most people want to learn about, but I was fascinated by it. And it won't be my last one that I read on this topic. Coming soon. Another portion of the Red, White, and June prompts say something about faith, enduring faith. I don't have the board in front of me right now, but I had recently heard about this book and I put it in my to-read list before this readathon came out, and I was like, now I could read this. This would be perfect. And I had to check the date because they said that it had to be between like up through the presidency of George Washington through, I think, the 1790 or 1789 or so. And this takes place, I think, in 1782. So I was like, oh, I could read it. And I hadn't heard of anyone talking about this book for this readathon. So I was like, yes, another one that I can introduce to people, which will be great. Because I was definitely introduced to many books by people that have posted about what they want to read. So this is what I read. Chancey the Frontiersman's Heart. It was a pretty good book. This is about Dawn. She has no hand. She was born that way. And that makes for a lot of difficult situations that she goes through. She is traveling with her step-parents. Now, her mother had been married to her stepfather and her mother died and then he remarried. Maybe I missed it. And then later I was like, what? She also has a stepsister. And I don't think that I think that the guy had been married before he married her mother. She was a baby, the stepsister. That's what I think it was. So Dawn, she has her baby stepsister who's only 4, named Mary. She basically has raised this child. And the two of them are basically servants to the step-parents. And they're on this trail. Because what you need to know is that after the Revolutionary War, land was given to many of the people that fought in the wars, and so they went traveling. And there is the Conestoga Trail that these people took to try to go to this new place to live. And on this trail is Jacob. Now Jacob, he had been just a messenger in the war. He's like, yeah, I was only a messenger. He's really upset that he didn't get to do battles. But when he was a child, he had a sweetheart who was Dawn. And the two of them are on this trail and they encounter each other after a few years of not seeing each other. So we get to see what that's like, what their relationship is like as they come together as friends again, and whatever else endures through that, what they do with dealing with these step parents, and to find about other battles that you'll read about in this book. It was really short. There is a book that's coming out that is a sequel. I think in August it comes out, so I hope to read that actually. When I found out that the second book was coming out, I was like, oh, cool. So for content, there is war violence, there's child abuse, there's abuse towards women, but not sexual. There is talk about consummating marriage. It's very G-rated. There are wounds, illnesses, and death. Oh, and because this goes into enduring faith, you're like, where's the faith? This is where they have to trust in God to get them through things that might be questionable, like what if this happens and, what if we die type of thing. And so they have to learn to depend on God through that. I wish the faith was a little stronger, but it is there. And then there is the one Red, White, and June prompt that says something about quills and writing things. Then I went to see what that meant on some of the videos that were introducing this. I even asked a couple of them, like, what if it's like diary entries? But then I was still reading the book that I was asking that about. And at the last 50 pages, there were letter correspondences. And if you want proof, I could show you. Here is one. Dear Abigail, from your friend. So that was a letter that she got. So, and she writes back at one point. And then there was another letter that the mother in this book got. So anyway, this fits the bill. If you want to do a book, that will probably be a quick read. I read this in a day. It's only 150 pages, guys, and the font is kind of big. Anyway, this is the second book in the Dear America series. So I read the first recently. I read the third one forever ago, and then as an adult. So I was really glad to read this. It was very good. The Winter of Red Snow. I learned a lot about how life experiences were during the 1700s. This one is set in 1777 in Valley Forge. This is where this young girl, she has her family. She has an older sister, a younger sister, and then a baby that's on the way, but her mother has lost loads of babies. And so they're really scared that this baby will not make it because of all the loss. It was really, really sad and very cute. And then along the way, we have the soldiers coming around and it's winter time. They're barefoot and just walking on the ice and they're bleeding. They get frostbite and she sees this. So she witnesses a lot of things as this 11-year-old girl when this book takes place. And all the soldiers are ragged and her sister makes coat and she's just trying to have fun. So we have where she's trying to be a little girl, but she's also around all this horrible death and nastiness. And she witnesses some of that nastiness and she gets to a point where she's like, I just want these soldiers to leave. It's really not cool. One thing that I learned is that did you know that baking soda can help alleviate wasp stings? That was in this book. This was eye-opening, even for me. Some of the things in here, I was like, wow, I've learned so much. And this is a middle grade book. I think it's good for teenagers, I think would be more appropriate, but maybe some preteens. Depends on their maturity level. I think it's very educational for people that are interested in learning about the Revolutionary War and what life was like. George Washington is in this book, as well as Alexander Hamilton and Benedict Arnold and Martha Washington. So we have some of those famous people in this book. So for content, okay, it's war stuff. So we have someone that is hung at one point. We have some amputations that go on and their limbs are piled up. There are battles, there are illnesses, there's death. There is talk about slavery, which is interesting because one of the books I want to read, there was a slave in this of Martha Washington, and I'm going to be reading a book with that slave, an account about her life, like a historical fiction book. And there are negative things about Quakers, and there's mentions of a runaway. Lastly, and this is the last one from my spring reading list, The God of the Garden. Andrew Peterson. I have read all of his books now. So I've read his Wingfeather saga and I read his Adorning the Darkness book. And this one is about him growing up in the South and being around trees, mainly trees. I feel like that's a slight backdrop for his story. A lot of this is just talking about how he went through a depressive state and just what his life was like, things he was going through. I felt like it was a good sequel to the other book that he wrote about his life, but there was nothing that I really got from it, to be honest with you. Nothing that stood out to me. I did like that he was into genealogy because I am that person in my family where I know my roots. He's that person in his family. I mean, that was interesting, but he wrapped it all up, how God created us to know him and how part of us being able to dwell with nature, being able to put our hands in the dirt, how that can help us be drawn nearer to God and his intentions for us through the Garden of Eden and all that he supplies for us. Well, that was exciting. Now I will be posting a video Thursday. I will have a very short video with my summer TBR list. I hope you will be able to enjoy that. That's where I get really funny. Tell me, what was your favorite book that you read this spring? My favorite book that I read this spring was As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, which was not on my spring TBR list. It was on my yearly list, but I read it this spring. Okay, guys, have a great week. Have fun. Enjoy your summer. Bye.